Tim and Kelly started dating in high school. Tim would bring Kelly out to the farm.
I really do believe that the two of them would eventually be married, that they would be a couple for life.
Tim and Kelly were going to go to a wedding reception at the Concord House.
Tim and Kelly get to the Concord House at approximately 10:30 p.m. They're there for approximately half an hour, 45 minutes. Witnesses say that Tim had a beer and Kelly had a soda during the time they were there, and there are witnesses that see them leave.
The next morning, get up and get work done. Except when you got up in the morning and Tim wasn't there, instantly there was a level of concern.
We called Kelly's mom and said, did they stay there? She said no. I drove up to the Concord House to look. Tim's car was still there. The door wasn't quite shut, and his wallet was still in the car. From there on, we finally realized Tim and Kelly are gone.
In the first 4 days, they were talking to all the employees from the Concord House. We were talking to wedding guests.
One consistent thing that was reported was that there was this dark, dirty van that had been in the parking lot. One witness specifically recalled the van taking off, sort of in a suspicious fashion, in a quick way.
The Concord House itself was right next to the interstate. There's a big parking lot. There's not a lot of lighting or anything out there. If you were intent on abducting somebody, all you had to do was wait for the right moment.
A teenager on his tractor had seen something as he was driving that caught his eye. A pair of pants, just like Kelly had been wearing on the night that she disappeared. Both the left and the right leg are completely cut from the ankle all the way up to the waist. And so in other words, the pants could have still been on her body, but they had been cut away.
It just magnified what I had thought all along, that someone had definitely raped her.
Over the course of 10 days, multiple pieces of clothing belonging to Kelly are found along the roadway within a 6-mile radius of the Concord House, as well as about a dozen pieces of rope with various knots tied in it. Squirrel hunters from Milwaukee are out in the Ixonia, Wisconsin area, which is approximately 7 miles from the Concord House. While they're walking through a wooded area, they stumble across a body. The body was badly decomposed, approximately 100 yards away. They locate a male body that's fully clothed and appears to be the same clothing that Tim was reported to have been wearing on August 9th, 1980.
The manner of death for both of them was homicide. Kelly was most possibly strangled based on damage and insect activity around the throat area. So then these pieces of rope we're finding along the roadsides become extremely significant.
There's the regular square knot, but there's also half hitches, clove hitches, bowline knots. This is somebody with knowledge of knot tying, somebody that's been in the Navy or the military or in the trades, like a carpenter, maybe a painter. It's not going to just be your everyday person that's going to tie these types of knots.
The case remains cold for more than 2 decades. The Hack family is forced to move on without their oldest son.
I was 8 years old at the time Tim and Kelly went missing. So when I first was elected district attorney, I was well aware of this case, and I wanted to know what happened to Tim and Kelly.
Knowing what a big case this was after being unsolved for so long, it immediately became my #1 goal to solve this case. At that time, DNA is becoming more and more popular. The DNA located on Kelly's pants and underwear was from seminal fluid. One evening, I received a phone call. It was a female who identifies herself as April. She said, "I think my dad could be responsible for Tim and Kelly. I think he killed them." And she said his name is Edward Wayne Edwards. She tells me about a book that he had written that she said would explain more about her father back in the early 70s. Edwards appears on numerous talk shows and game shows with this book about his life as a master criminal. In the late 60s, Edwards was on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list. He was a suspect in a double homicide in Portland, Oregon.
As I read the book, what was so interesting was he exhibited all of the classic signs of, the stereotypical signs of a serial killer. He was a bedwetter. He had an affinity for starting fires. He was extremely controlling.
For some serial killers, the need to put on a normal face to interact with members of society and have access to victims is very important. In fact, if they looked unusual or weird or bizarre, they might not get to approach victims in the way that they need to.
In addition to that, Edwards' daughter, April, had told me her dad was in the military, that he had been dishonorably discharged from the military.
So Ed Edwards knows how to tie these knots.
I had him on my suspect list. Edwards was interviewed in early September of 1980. He did not know anything about Tim or Kelly's disappearance. The one thing that stuck out to me was that he had a broken nose. He said it was a deer hunting incident that caused the rifle to kick back and caused the broken nose. That seemed odd to me. Gun deer hunting in Wisconsin is November, not in August. Once I found out where Edwards had lived, I talked to the landlord that took care of the house. He said that Edwards lived in that house for a brief time and then moved to another state shortly after the disappearance of Tim and Kelly. Edwards had a van. He kept a .357 revolver in the van. This van adds up with the van that was spotted that night. Everything was making sense. I think I know what happened to Tim and Kelly. Edwards was waiting in the parking lot. Kelly fit the profile he was looking for. Tim, being a strong farm boy, got a good swing in on Edwards, causing the broken nose. And that's when Tim was stabbed. There's no telling what happened in the van, but we know that Kelly was raped and strangled to death. He was in a wheelchair, on oxygen, very overweight, and not in very good health. Throughout the entire time that we spoke with him, he acted very nonchalant, like it didn't matter that we were there at all.
For some serial killers, it is a game. Given Edwards' age, it might have been this was his last opportunity to manipulate law enforcement.
When I asked him to provide a sample of his DNA so that we could test it, he said that he had no problem doing that. He thinks he's smarter than us. After 29 years, he's thinking, what DNA are we going to have? How are we going to prove this? Turns out it's a match. During the final hour or two of the interview, we asked him if he could explain the seminal fluid DNA being on Kelly's clothes.
So then he comes up with the most unbelievable story.
All right, I had sex with her.
You had sex with the young lady who died?
Yes.
Okay, that explains why. Consensual?
Who, with me? Yes. Oh, yes.
Not forcible, not...
Oh, no. It was consensual.
Tim and Kelly were joined at the hip. Kelly Drew's not going to go off and willingly have sex with Ed Edwards in a cornfield.
I went back to see if maybe there was something he said that I didn't pick up on, or maybe there were certain movements he made to tell me when he was lying.
Her boyfriend.
As I'm watching the video, something struck me. He said something sort of under his breath.
We probably rewound it, 1,000 times, trying to make sure that we heard what we heard.
And after listening to it repeatedly and having many others listen to it repeatedly, everyone agreed that what he said is,
Damn, I killed her.
damn it, I killed her.
Damn, I killed her.
To hear him say, damn it, I killed her. It's a goosebump moment.
Ultimately, he pleads guilty to killing Tim and Kelly.
Edwards confesses to killing his foster son, Danny.
Edwards was an over-the-road truck driver that traveled to California in the late 60s. Because of this, some people believe Edward Wayne Edwards is the Zodiac killer.
Some of the links include the fact that Edwards was a drifter and he could have been in California at this time, the fact that Edwards killed couples, and that the Zodiac killer also killed couples.
Symbols that are used to sign off on the Zodiac letters consist of 13 symbols. Edward Edwards is 13 letters, and his birth name of Charles Murray is 13 letters as well.
On a cool Wednesday afternoon, 24-year-old Lisa Ziegert shows up on time, as always, for work at Brittany's Card and Gift Shop.
That night, I had just popped into the store just to check in, just to say hi, just to catch up. We were talking about her being a teacher. Lisa was student teaching during the day, and then she worked at Brittany's at night. And then we just said our cheerful, normal hug and kiss goodbyes, and I went home. The next morning, early in my day, I hadn't been at work very long, I got a phone call because Lisa had not shown up to work at the school, and that was highly unusual.
Minutes later, Lynn's phone rings again. It's another of Lisa's worried coworkers.
My friend worked at the same card and gift shop. She had come for her morning shift, and the store was found open. Lisa's car was in the parking lot, and her belongings were still on the counter. My friend knew something was not right, and that's when she called the police. None of it made any sense. I had just been there the night before. Everything seemed normal.
Lynn came to my office, and I said, "Oh, what are you doing here?" She said, "Mom, Lisa's missing." She didn't just leave. She had a great rapport with kids.
She was drawing, she's, teaching. She was happy with her boyfriend, Blair.
She loved him and was convinced that, someday that they would marry and have children.
She was just happy with her life.
The police officers who responded right at the beginning knew that something very bad had happened. Lisa's belongings were still inside the store under the counter. There were no signs of a robbery. The cash was still in the register. Today, we might check video cameras and surveillance in the area, but there was no such thing at the time. But there were some signs that a struggle had occurred, especially in the back office area.
There appears to be a spot of blood on the top of the refrigerator door.
They checked the alley behind, they checked businesses nearby, dumpsters nearby, see if there was any type of evidence that might have been found there, and they started talking to people from the nearby businesses, trying to track down anyone who might have witnessed something. But investigators didn't find anything at the scene to suggest where Lisa had gone or who might have taken her.
The store was crawling with policemen. The detectives asked, was she having trouble with anybody? We were unaware of anybody having any interest in harming Lisa.
I kept thinking, why would anyone hurt her? She was such a good person. Why wouldn't they just let her go?
On Easter Sunday, an Agawam resident was walking behind his property. He saw in a clearing in the woods a partially naked body of a female. The Agawam police were able to immediately identify that body as belonging to Lisa Ziegert.
Lisa is found about a mile away from Brittany's card shop.
The area was definitely off the beaten path. It was on a clearing on kind of a dirt road. Lisa had significant injuries, including at least half a dozen knife wounds. And there was evidence that she had been in a fight for her life.
The investigation reveals, through autopsy in particular, that Lisa's also sexually assaulted. And there were multiple deposits of forensic evidence, and a lot of effort went into determining that this was a single source male DNA profile.
One of the witnesses also reported to investigators that he had seen a suspicious person lurking across the street before Lisa had been taken. The guy was kind of moving back and forth in a strange way, and he described him as a relatively tall, slender man wearing a dark army-style jacket.
I remember the night I went to visit her at the store the Thursday before she went missing. There was a customer in the store, and I remember him staying for a while. I thought it was odd that he was hovering. I remember her saying that, you know, he comes in sometimes to look at the collectibles, trying to, you know, figure out which one he wants to buy someone. So I knew that the person was somebody that she had seen in the store before. And I just remember him staying for a long time and wishing he would leave. I did tell the police about the man in the store and his description. I remember him being a tall, thin, dark-haired man. He was wearing a black jacket.
Kimberly's description is a near match to the man spotted outside the gift shop the night of the murder.
Investigators did look at Lisa's boyfriend. That would have been a standard procedure in any investigation that had been unsolved at that point.
When they talked to the boyfriend, he did have an alibi.
Blair claims he was with his mother around the time Lisa was abducted, but detectives still take a long, hard look at him.
They impounded Blair's car. They had him back and forth for questioning. They took DNA.
There were no concerns about domestic violence. By all accounts, it sounded like a loving relationship.
I remember Blair went out to go look for her. He didn't want to stop searching. Blair just didn't want to give up.
Investigators spoke to other people who would have been with him. They were able to establish an alibi that ruled him out and later obtain a DNA profile from him that also ruled him out as a suspect. DNA technology hadn't advanced to the point where we could do some of the alternative testing methods that we can do today. So if somebody refused to provide a DNA sample, there wasn't really much that investigators could do.
There is new hope the case will be solved when the state's youngest ever district attorney, Anthony Gallooni, takes office.
We thought that DNA phenotyping could provide some characteristics of this individual, like hair color and eye color, skin tone, that it could narrow the course of our investigation.
In 2016, D.A. Gallooni's team submits the killer's 24-year-old DNA sample for analysis.
A short time later, we were provided a composite sketch of an individual. This individual was Caucasian, of European descent, had brown or hazel eyes, dark hair, moderate skin tone. We now knew that someone, for instance, with blonde hair and blue eyes was not the perpetrator. Someone who was of African-American descent or Asian descent was not the perpetrator. So we were able to eliminate a substantial number of individuals.
I started looking at people who had been contacted by investigators in the past and who had refused to provide a DNA sample. We went back to these people, and just by explaining what we were doing, a good percentage of them gave their DNA samples. So at the end of that process, we were able to identify 11 people, and the grand jury voted to ask the court to compel these individuals to provide that sample.
Around 6:30, I got a phone call that a woman had gone into a state police barracks in Westfield and had claimed that her boyfriend authored some documents that she provided to the troopers.
They were a confessional and an apology to the Ziegert family. The essence of it was, I took Lisa from her family and I will never forgive myself. He says overtly, they're going to tell you that 25 years ago, I kidnapped, raped, and murdered a young woman, and it's all true.
You know, that struck me like a ton of bricks.
He wrote in the letter that he believed that what I had was a warrant for his DNA, and that was going to put him in jail for life. And that either he was going to kill himself or face the music.
Troopers interview the woman whose boyfriend wrote the letters.
She described him as docile. He just seemed like an average nice guy. She would never in a million years suspect would be capable of doing something like this.
She tells police her boyfriend is 48-year-old Gary Shara.
Gary Shara was one of the 11 names that we had taken before the grand jury.
Gary Shara first becomes known to investigators in the context of Lisa Siegert's death in March of 1993.
Gary Shara was one of dozens, if not hundreds, of men whose name had come up in a similar way. His ex-wife said that he was very interested in the case. He would always run into the room when the news came on about this case. She also said that she thought that he had purchased a music box at Brittany's card shop within the days or weeks before Lisa was taken.
Investigators speak to Gary Shara in 2002. He refused to provide his DNA voluntarily at that time. In 2008, investigators again speak with Gary Shara.
Gary appeared to be very conscious of not providing a DNA sample, either intentionally or accidentally. He wouldn't touch the table, wouldn't take water that was provided to him. He was asked to provide a DNA sample at that time, and he refused. His reasoning, he was afraid of cloning.
There was certainly nothing illegal about one's refusal to provide DNA. That didn't necessarily signal something nefarious.
But at the end of the day, there just wasn't enough there for them to move forward with him as a suspect at that time. We wrote a search warrant for his house. We seized a number of items that were likely to have his DNA on them. One item was his toothbrush. Toothbrush was taken to the State Police Crime Lab.
I remember very vividly awaiting the results.
Myself and my lieutenant were in the office, and on my cell phone, it lit up Concord, Mass, and that's where the lab is.
We learned that the profile developed from Gary's toothbrush matched the single-source male DNA profile obtained in 1992 from Lisa Siegert's killer.
Gary Shara was charged with aggravated kidnapping, aggravated rape, and first-degree murder.
Shara pleads not guilty. 27 years after Lisa's murder, Shara finally breaks his silence.
Tell me then in your own words why we're here.
We're here to make a change of plea.
To guilty to murder in the first degree. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir, I do.
Mr. Shara, the court has accepted your plea of guilty to indictment 17-600, count 1, charging murder in the first degree. The court orders you to serve a term of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Dave Bittman is a constable for the Edmonton Police Service. On a Sunday morning, he and his partner rolled to Rundle Park Village, where a 6-year-old named Karine Punky Gustafson has gone missing.
My first thoughts were, come on now, it's a quiet morning. Perhaps this little girl went to the local convenience store with another friend, and maybe there's trouble at home and she didn't want to go home right away. I went up to the front door and knocked on the door, and there I met Ray Gustafson.
Gustafson tells Bittman Karine was outside playing with her friend Lindsay, who reported that a man had taken Karine.
Between her mother coming home with the look of sheer terror on her face and the information that we'd gleaned thus far, I had thought in my own mind at that time that this was a bona fide abduction.
To get a better handle on what he's dealing with, Bittman walks to the back of the house where the girls were playing.
This suspect walks up, comes right up to them, and essentially just grabs onto Karine, takes her in his arms, and then turns 180 degrees and heads directly back towards that walkway.
Lindsay is unable to provide a clear description of the abductor, but Bittman gets what information he can out of the 5-year-old.
We come around the corner and ask our witness, point directly the route that this fellow took. Point to us, tell us, show us. And she walks us again through this little walkway between the units, 147 and 148.
About 50 feet down the walkway, Bittman notices a dampened patch of mud and a footprint.
The most prominent footwear impression that was inlaid in this mud appeared to be that of a sports shoe, like somebody playing soccer or baseball would wear, like a cleat.
Bittman takes a sketch of the impression, and a door-to-door search of the neighborhood begins. 2 days after Karine Gustafson disappeared, detectives Terry Alm and Al Sauvé arrive at a trucking yard just outside Edmonton's city limits. The body of a 6-year-old girl lies in the mud near the back of the lot. It is not immediately apparent to the detectives how Karine Gustafson died. It does appear, however, that she was killed somewhere else and then dumped among the flatbeds.
She had been redressed. The way in which her panties were on, the way in which her pants were on, the way in which her coat was put on, all led us to believe that she was killed and raped somewhere else.
Not far from the body, investigators noticed tire tracks and cleat marks similar to those found at the Gustafson home. An autopsy establishes that Karine was most likely smothered to death. The ME also discovers a single pubic hair on the victim's left ankle.
But it was such a small piece that the DNA technology at the time didn't lend itself to developing a profile from that. So the hope was that as DNA technology advanced, that we'd eventually get a profile from the partial root bulb on that pubic hair.
By January of 2000, Terry Alm has been working the Gustafson case for more than 7 years, nearly the last 4 by himself.
So we decided to have all of Karine's clothing and the swabs re-examined.
Alm hopes new technology will be able to identify and develop a usable DNA profile in the case. He sends items of evidence to a private lab in North Carolina. 1 year later, Alm gets a call. The unknown profile is uploaded into Canada's National DNA Databank and hits to a man named Clifford Slay, a convicted sex offender, and a name Terry Alm is familiar with.
Clifford Slay had come to our attention in May of '93 when he had sexually assaulted a young teenage girl. And he was investigated at the time. His family had alibied him, and he was sort of put on the back burner.
Slay was one of thousands of suspects looked at during the 10-year Gustafson investigation. Now he takes center stage and is asked to explain why his semen was found on the clothes of a 6-year-old.
We're not here to pass judgment on you. We're only here to deal with the truth.
We knew from our background research that once Clifford was put into or painted into a corner where he thought the gig was up and the deck was stacked against him, that he would tell the truth.
Slay is informed that DNA testing has matched his genetic profile to semen found on the victim's clothes. The next day, the suspect decides he wants to talk.
He is cold and calculated. It's almost a matter of fact. At that point, with us, there are no tears, there is no emotion.
I look at what I've done, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel. I just don't have really prepared for what's going to happen, but I've done a lot of thinking. I've come to terms that this is something I have to own up to.
Slay tells Godfrey that in September of 1992, he was having marital problems with his common-law wife.
It was a combination of a lot of things going on. I had started drinking. I was with my common-law wife then. got into a bit of a fight.
And he wanted to punish her. And potentially he wanted to locate her daughter and assault her.
Slay could not locate his wife's daughter. Instead, he left the apartment and got into his brother-in-law's car.
I had plans of just going down to the Mohawk station, just for a pack of cigarettes.
He went out, and it would appear he went out on the prowl, or on the hunt.
I was so very angry. I was pretty drunk. I was actually going to turn around. I turned into these apartment townhouses.
Slay says he pulled into Rundle Park Village and noticed 6-year-old Karine Gustafson playing with her friend.
I'd seen these two little girls playing in this fence area. I had made up my mind that I was going to grab one of them. And it just happened to be the one closest to the fence.
And he tucked her under his arm and put her in his vehicle and took off.
I'd taken, this little girl to, I don't know, there was just this road that I followed. As I drove down this road, the thoughts were there, but I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to kind of drive as far as I could on this road, drop off, and just leave. But when I realized that there was no traffic in this area, it's very secluded, I just took it upon myself to, I just have sex with her. Really use the terminology to rape her.
Slay says he raped Karine for some 10 minutes. When he finished, Slay claims Karine was still alive and that he let her go.
I'd taken her out of the car, took her, and I put her on the back end of this part of the trailer. I guess the fenders would be to cover the tires. I sat her on there.
We know how she was found. That's very clear how she was found, and that was not true.
Slay fails to take responsibility for Karine's murder. Godfrey believes it to be a calculated move.
I think he tried to minimize his involvement. I think he knew the difference between first-degree murder and second-degree murder and potentially manslaughter, so that his explanation was made to try and fit something less than a first-degree murder conviction.
Slay is arrested and booked on a charge of murder. Jason Track is the Crown Prosecutor for Alberta and responsible for trying Clifford Slay for first-degree murder.
He made the admission of abducting this child. He also made the admission of sexually assaulting her. We looked at all of the evidence, and we believe that to a degree of 100% certainty, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but to 100% certainty, she was dead when he left her.
As part of his case, Track plays Slay's confession in open court.
I guess I raped her, but I didn't kill her. I was very surprised when I heard that she had died.
It was putrid to listen to the tape of his confession and to hear this stuff coming from his mouth and trying to downplay his culpability in this crime.
The tape plays exactly as the prosecution had intended. Slay's words appearing to be both callous and calculating.
If he was capable of empathy and remorse, he never would have committed such a crime, but he's such a botched human being that he was able to do such an act.
The jury deliberates for 1 day and returns the verdict Track requested. Slay is found guilty of murder in the first degree and sentenced to life in prison. Under Canadian law, however, he will be eligible to apply for parole in 25 years. Paul Savini is a detective with the Woonsocket Police. In April of 2003, he works the missing persons case of a local prostitute.
Her name was Audrey Harris. She was in her 40s.
A month after Audrey Harris goes missing, her case remains unsolved when a second woman disappears off a Woonsocket street corner.
My partner and I were assigned a missing persons case on a Christine Dumont. She was a 42-year-old white female, reported missing May 3rd of 2004.
Like Audrey Harris, Christine Dumont is a woman on the edge, a drug user who has worked the streets for years and is now missing. Debbie Berger worries about her daughter, Stacy.
I think she was looking for fast money and got up in the wrong situation and liked the cash, but didn't like what she did.
In July of 2004, a mother's worst fears are realized when Stacy's boyfriend files a missing persons report with police.
He says, "Stacy's missing." I says, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah, she didn't come home last night."
That's it. It's like she disappeared off the face of the earth.
The people who were missing, we knew that they were arrested before for prostitution. We know that's a high-risk endeavor.
The pair dig into the three cases and quickly ID a pool of suspects.
We really had no other suspects other than a potential John.
We want to know everyone that's coming into the city picking up these prostitutes.
An anonymous call to the PD gives detectives a fresh lead.
Jocelyn Martel was attacked by a guy. She fits the same category as the girls that are missing. Probably has information that you might want. Maybe you should get a hold of her.
The information was a phone call, an anonymous phone call, that said, "We might want to speak with Jocelyn Martel."
I had a heroin addiction. I did it because I needed the money for my drug addiction.
In July of 2004, cold case detectives sit down and listen as Martel talks about the night a trick almost turned deadly.
He pulled up. I was walking on the sidewalk, and he's like, "You want to make some money?" And I was like, "Yeah, you know." We went into the house. We spoke about money for sex. I asked him where he wanted to go, and as soon as I turned my back to him, he put his arm around my neck and started choking me. What I did was I banged my head back on his head, and we both fell backwards. And when we both fell backwards, I stuck my thumb in his eye, and he let me go, and I ran out the door.
Jocelyn survived the assault, but never reported it to police.
It's unfortunate. A lot of times they think that the police aren't going to help them because of the lifestyle they're in. That's certainly not the case.
Jocelyn doesn't know her attacker's name, but she remembers where he lives.
The color of the house, and she described the shutters, the trim. She described how she got in. We were able to get that address, run it through our computer system, find out who lives there.
The house is rented by 33-year-old Jeff Mailhut.
He's nowhere to be found in our database. Not a ticket, not an arrest.
Mailhut seems clean. Then detectives run his home address through their computers.
We did a computer check, and then Eddie found that there was another case at that house that had happened several months earlier with another prostitute.
Another prostitute who tells detectives about a John who tried to kill her.
He said, "All right, you know, come in, have a drink." So I sat at the kitchen table, you know, and we was talking and everything like that. I opened up a can of beer and I grabbed a napkin. And when I went to turn back around, he was behind me.
He comes up from behind, gets her in a chokehold, and she has a violent struggle with him. She remembers that to the point of almost losing consciousness.
The man grabbed me with his forearm and had me like this in a chokehold. I could not breathe, and I couldn't scream. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die.
She just screams and pleads for her life. "Please, please, please, you let me go. Well, you know, I won't say anything to anybody."
He didn't say not one word to me. And I knew at that point my life was over. And I started crying. I'm saying, "Sir, please, I have a baby. My money's in my pocketbook. Please, just don't hurt me."
And she says this, gives him this cold stare, and just tells her to leave, and she walks out the apartment.
I don't know why he didn't kill me. I don't know why he let me go. He just said, "Get the out of here. I don't want to see you around here no more."
Teese Morris is the second woman to allegedly be attacked by Mailhut and live to tell about it.
I think this guy's playing this game. He's already choked 2 girls. I mean, chokehold is a very, very dangerous move. He tried it on these 2. Obviously, he might have tried it on other girls, and maybe they didn't get away. And that was our whole theory. So, yeah, we had our arrest warrant and our search warrant, and we, very hopeful to get him in.
On July 16th, Sergeants Lee and Nowak head to 221 Cato Street and slip the cuffs on Jeff Mailhut.
Hi, Jeff. Any idea why you're here?
No idea. No idea.
You ever have a problem with a prostitute in your house?
I've never had a serious problem with a prostitute in my house, no.
It's a game. You go into that room, and your sole purpose is to retrieve whatever he's hiding. You get this off your conscience. It's going to be like someone left in a car with your back. I've seen this 1,000 times. What is it?
9-5.
You what?
I've gotten a little physical.
Yeah. Okay. What do you usually do?
I choked him a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I'm trying to get at. Okay? I'm sure you feel better getting that off your chest, but...
Mailhut admits to choking prostitutes, but will go no further.
It's never going too far. It's never going that. I've never killed anybody.
You never choked someone that didn't wake up?
No.
Detectives aren't buying Mailhut's story. Lee switches gears and slides photos of 3 girls across the table.
I don't know any of these girls.
No?
Mm-mm. None of these is the ones that I had.
You positive? That was a pretty quick look. When I threw those 3 photos down there, the 3 victims, he had an immediate reaction. You could see it all over his body language, his expressions. He was very nervous, and he knew there was something there.
I mean, I've never killed anybody. That's what you're getting at.
Who said that these girls are killed? First.
He told us, you guys think I killed these girls. We had never told him that the girls were dead. We didn't know the girls were dead. So that was a red flag for us. That's when we really started hitting him a little harder with, the questions we were asking.
I hope you know the truth, because you're playing stuff in your apartment, coming up, anything, you know all about DNA and all that stuff now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Detectives are walking Mailhut closer and closer to the very edge of a triple homicide.
It was apparent that he was going to give it up. I mean, he was starting to cry, he was shaking, he would pause, long, unnatural pauses, like he was thinking about, what should I do?
You're playing a dangerous, dangerous game out there with these girls. Any one of these girls could have ended up dead. We will get to the bottom whether or not you had these girls in your house. Tears start to well up in his eyes that you can't see on the videotape, but sitting there, that's when you realize, oh my God, he's going to confess to this.
A little more than an hour into the interview, Mailhut breaks.
Jeff, your life will be over. Over unless you get this off your chest. I know you're not a bad man. I know you just pushed it too far. What happened? What happened, Jeff? What happened? You pushed it too far one night, right? Things got out of hand. Huh?
Yeah.
All of them?
Mm-hmm.
All 3?
All 3.
All right. Good job. Where are they? Where are they, Jeff?
Dead.
You're working so hard, and then when it finally comes, it's like, oh my God, he's really done this. A million things are going through your mind, your heart's racing, your adrenaline's flowing. Where are they?
They're in garbage bags.
Garbage bags? Where?
I just dumped them in trash containers.
How did you fit them in trash bags?
I cut them up.
Mailhut says he cut up each victim in his bathtub, wrapped their body parts in black plastic bags, and threw them in dumpsters.
I wanted to choke him myself. I mean, I could not believe that a human being could do that to another human being.
Just before 9 p.m., Mailhut is cuffed and led to a jail cell. With confession in hand, detectives believe their case is complete. That is, until the DA decides the state needs more.
It's not enough for somebody to say, I did it. You have to give some evidence that it occurred, and we didn't have the bodies.
Where is she?
I don't know right now where she is, probably in landfill right now.
If Jeff Mailhot dumped his victims like trash, their remains should be at the local landfill. On July 19th, cold case detectives head out with a backhoe.
It's kind of hard to believe the magnitude of what's behind me, but the size of the landfill, the amount of trash that was here, just realizing, I mean, you're kind of, in essence, looking for a needle in a haystack, I guess you can say.
For 6 days, the team searches, but comes up empty-handed. On the 7th, Detective Fairley unearths a small black bag wrapped in duct tape.
When I did open it, it was kind of, a little shock to me. I saw the remains of a scalp, a crushed scalp. I believe it was 2 forearms. The skin was removed, the bones were crushed, but I was able to decipher what was what, distinguish those amongst other body parts.
The remains are eventually ID'd as Stacy Goulet, the last of Jeff Mailhot's victims. The remains of Audrey Harris and Christine Dumont are never recovered. On February 15th, the defendant pleads guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of assault.
So he got life plus 10 years. That's how it broke down.
What he did was horrendous. To me, I look at him, he's just a monster. I was satisfied for what he received. I'm confident that he'll never see the light of day again, and he'll spend the rest of his remaining years behind bars where he belongs.
On a cold Colorado morning, a woman drives through Daniels Park.
She was a foster parent, and she had several kids in the car, and she looked out, and it appeared to be a female body in the fields. She kept driving, and she saw a road worker pulled over and told him what she saw. And he decided to, get out of there and call law enforcement.
Douglas County officers did arrive. The investigators found a younger female, probably at that point, late teens, early 20s, lying on her back.
You could see that there are 2 sets of footprints going in and only 1 set coming out. And they looked like they were like a boot, like a cowboy boot. So we now know that the crime scene occurred here because this person is walking. They're not being carried in and just dropped.
Police in nearby Englewood say a 21-year-old woman was reported missing the night before.
The Englewood Police Department had taken a missing persons report on January 16th. The person that they took a report on was Helene Przezinski.
Helene went to high school in Hamilton, Massachusetts, a small town north of Boston.
She very much wanted to be part of the school and part of different organizations, very much into drama, very much into the school spirit. She was into poetry, she was into singing, she had a beautiful voice.
She was the youngest of 3 children, and her mom and dad, especially her dad, always called her baby.
As a college senior in 1979, she picked up and moved again, this time to Colorado, where she interned at a radio station.
It was a cold day, and it looked like it was going to snow. Helene came in the news booth and said, "It's starting to snow outside, and I'm a little concerned about my bus ride home." And she said, "Could I leave a little bit early if I need to?" I said, "If you'll wait 15 minutes, I'll give you a ride home." I said, "I'd feel a lot better if you let me take you home." And she thought about it for a minute, and she said, "No, I think I'll just ride the bus." So she left. I left the station that night to go home, which was about 6:15. The phone rang about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and it was Helene's aunt. And she said, "Helene has not come home yet. Do you know if she went someplace that I'm not aware of?" And I said, "No, she left the station right around 6 o'clock. Said she was going to catch the bus and go straight home."
My best friend was a captain, and he said, "We just had a call from Douglas County that they found a body of a young female, and they want you to go out and see if you can identify it." I just knew this had to be her. This was the only reported missing young female. I just sick in my stomach. I didn't want to go to the scene and identify the body, but didn't have any choice. We drove down to the location. I had to get out and walk out into the snowy field. But as soon as I got to the body, I knew it was her. I instantly knew it was her. It was the worst thing I ever had to do, and it's never left my mind.
The coroner identified that she had been stabbed 9 times in the back.
Cause of death was from loss of blood, and both of her lungs had collapsed.
The pathologist was able to confirm that she was sexually assaulted.
They were able to find some fluid, some dry fluid, could possibly be saliva or could be semen. So they took samples of it and they preserved it.
The way that she was murdered does give an indication that this is a crime of passion. And so that sometimes leads to an individual who might know her.
We were told that the brutality of the murder, it was with such rage that there was an opportunity for it to be someone that she knew. It seemed personal.
But she's brand new to town. She didn't have friends outside of the radio station.
I was contacted by several investigators after the day that Helene was found, and they wanted all the information I could give them about people that worked for me, people in the radio station, anybody she had come in contact with, or if there was anybody I thought that might want to harm her.
Her aunt and uncle, they were the only people that she had. She had no one else in her sphere of interest other than what she had developed for a very short period of time of 2 weeks at her internship.
Unfortunately, nobody panned out.
We put out a $10,000 reward for any information. We ran stories on the air asking people to come forward.
A lady contacted law enforcement. She had saw a vehicle parked on the side of the road in the location that Helene's body was found. She saw a male suspect that appeared to be kneeling down by the rear of the vehicle and looked toward her, and the hazards were on.
Investigators used hypnosis and a crime scene sketch artist to develop a composite of a suspect that she thought she had seen.
They have a composite of this white male with, thick hair kind of parted to the side with the mustache, but it was aired and nothing ever came of it.
I made a promise to her parents that I would not rest until we found out who, why, how, and get the answers for them.
Anything new that happened in forensic science, anything new that happened in investigations, she was on top of it. She was searching it. She was trying to find an answer to whoever killed her friend Helene.
In 1980, that DNA wasn't useful. But decades later, investigators have new tools that might help identify Helene's killer.
We gave them DNA of our suspect to create from that genetic data a family tree.
Detectives build the branches of that tree using commercial genealogy sites like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. They simply run DNA from the crime scene through those sites, looking for anyone with even partial DNA matches based on centimorgans.
Centimorgans is a unit for measuring DNA. You and I may not be related at all, so there'd be no centimorgans. If you and I were siblings, it would be a very high number.
Investigators work on the DNA sample and the genealogy sites for weeks, and they finally get a promising lead.
We found who we thought was the mother of the person that did this horrible act in Douglas County. She was the mother of multiple kids, but the women could be thrown out right away. They didn't commit this crime because it was a male sample. It was a semen sample. But by all accounts and all records, she didn't have any boys.
When detectives question the woman's relatives, they get one step closer to the truth. They discover she'd given up 2 sons for adoption.
My genealogist and this detective dug deeper, And what they came up with was a very old newspaper article about a reunion between this woman and her son. And in that article, they mentioned another son. Now we knew she had 2 boys. We were able to eliminate one of the sons very quickly because his DNA was already in the CODIS DNA system and was no match. The younger brother that we focused on, his name was Curtis Allen White. Mr. White had committed a rape before 1980. He had gone to prison for that rape. In fact, he used a knife. This is long before DNA, so there was no DNA database for him to go into. He served a very short sentence for such a violent crime, and then he paroled to Colorado.
He was out here during the time that Helene, he came here in 1979, and was out here during the time that Helene would have been murdered. So now we're feeling like, okay, this could be our guy. We check his fingerprints, and they come back to a guy named James Curtis Clanton down in Florida. So detectives follow up on that, and James Curtis Clanton is arrested in 1998 for domestic violence. And once they send the booking photo to us, when it was compared to the composite drawing that was given to us by a lady under hypnosis in 1980, were almost identical.
We talked about how I don't really care about stolen cars from 1980 in Colorado, but we do care about a young woman in Colorado in 1980. And we want to show you a picture of her and see if you recognize her. Gotcha. I think I want to turn you now.
You see him look at it, and his demeanor changed.
Investigators are now certain they are face to face with Helene's killer.
We actually do have a warrant for your arrest for first-degree murder and kidnapping.
For what?
First-degree murder and kidnapping.
You got the wrong guy.
We actually have your DNA in her and on her.
When the sergeant said your semen was found on her and in her, he kind of paused and just said, "Oh." I think that was a very pivotal moment in Mr. Clanton's heart.
So at this point, you are under arrest. We're going to be turning you over to the custody of the Union County Sheriff's Office at this point, where you'll be held without bond pending extradition.
Police arrest James Clanton on the spot. Police bring Clanton to Colorado to face murder charges. During the flight, he opens up about that night in 1980.
You remember what you were wearing? No. Would you have been wearing cowboy boots, shoes? I'm sure I was wearing cowboy boots. What made Helene the right target? Fate.
He said he saw Helene stand up to get off the bus. He made a U-turn, and as she's crossing the street, he shows her the knife. She says, "I see it." He walks over, puts his arm around her and says, "Come with me," and ties her hands behind her back with the strap from her purse.
She didn't tell me about herself. She asked me what I was doing, and I told her that I was kidnapping her for money, and she said, "Well, my parents don't have any money," and, stuff like that. I didn't tell her what I was really doing until we got in the woodshed.
We just talked about in 6 hours on a plane, I mean, anything and everything, and there was nothing that was off limits. And, one thing that we asked several times was, did you commit any other crimes? And did you commit any other sex assaults or rapes or murders or anything? And he was adamant that he didn't. He had his mind that he was going to grab a girl and he was going to kidnap her and rape her. That was his plan.
It was a relief, but there's never closure on something that's so heinous like this.
James Clanton pleads guilty in a Colorado courtroom. 63-year-old Clanton is sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole after 20 years.